Hi, and welcome to Wrong Way. Yeah, today we are a bit without singing because it's a serious subject. And today we're going to talk about sudden EUC combustion or fires, and what you need to know about it and how to prevent it. So, let me tell you more about it. Wrong way.
Poparzyłem rękę. To się rozkręca. Tam zostało 3 pełne pakiety. No wyobraźcie sobie, co by było, gdyby one się do nogi stawić. Ale tam są śrubki, wszystko posługiwanie w śrubach.
Odważne, wszystko spierdzielają, nie? Dobra, jeden mamy.
Ściowo został ten też już, po tej stronie został.
Uważaj, to ładnie na ten.
Uważaj.
Okay, so today we are going to discuss lithium-ion battery pack fire, and all in all, what can lead to a EUC fire. First of all, I'm going to tell you what to do if that happens and how you can see it and how you can react in case of a sudden EUC fire. Then I'm going to tell you about 2 recent examples of this happening. One in the United States in Portland, and the second one here in Poland, with 2 different wheels, but both are Begode. And third, we're going to discuss what manufacturers need to do in order to prevent this from happening. So number one, what happens if a EUC starts to burn is, number one, you will smell a certain smoke, and this smoke is really just toxic and really bad for your lungs. Recently, Bogdan, a friend of mine, had a EUC catch on fire in his car, and the car filled up with toxic smoke, which is really bad for your lungs, and obviously this can hurt your lungs. So what you will hear first is either a sizzling, probably, and you will start smelling something similar to a burning cable or just burning electronics. And if that happens, the first thing you need to do, you need to grab the EUC if it still is not burning and throw it outside and not keep it at home. And in both cases that I know, the people who had the EUC close by did exactly the right thing. Now, if you can't do it, the EUC will be just really warm and you can burn your fingers for sure, and cells will keep exploding because of the heat. Now, what you can do as well is get a fire extinguisher. And you know, before I thought that fire extinguishers don't help, but actually if you get a extinguisher like this, which is destined also for high voltage devices, then this will also help to just diminish the fire. Better to get one of those at your home for sure. Now I got this, I have also a second one at home. So yeah, in case you can't just throw it out on the street, of course look if there are any pedestrians in close proximity, then you need to just use a fire extinguisher. And you know, all that stuff is really basic, but I think the most important criteria is to just react fast. And probably the biggest issue arises if like no one is at home. So this is what you can do. There's also like the small automatic fireballs which Fuji Rolls has. I think they would help as well. I don't have them yet, but I'll buy some of those as well. So now we'll talk about the 2 cases that recently happened, one of which I know a bit more about, the case here in Poland, and the second one in the United States. So both wheels were Begode wheels. The one was a Gotway MSP, and Tyler had suddenly in the morning, his EUC started catching on fire, and he threw it out of the balcony just as the cells were exploding inside of the EUC. Now, the EUC was at a 85% or so battery stage and was sitting inside at home for about 3 days. So it's really hard for me to tell what is really the issue here. And the EUC was opened up before, and it was just a tire swap, and it's really hard to see like what could be possibly the issue here. One of the issues, which we'll talk about later also, is that the battery packs by Begode are just not well isolated enough. So they're held in place in these baskets for for cells, but on the top and on the bottom there's no epoxy, or there's no like safety layers that prevent any movement of the plates which hold the batteries together, and this naturally can lead to a short circuit. And the problem all in all in Begode wheels is that it's really easy to get a short circuit, and even the charge port is always at 100 volt. So if something falls in, it starts to sizzle. Now, I heard that there are some security measures in order to decrease that or eliminate that issue, but it's actually not the case, because I had a short circuit in Begode wheels for a couple of times already, but it never led to something as intense or serious as a battery fire. Another weak point is also that the motherboard is on the side with the battery in one compartment, and it's fixed in place by using only wood screws screwed in the plastic, and sometimes these screws also stick out on the other side of the wheel well. So it's really easy to get the motherboard to just move around, because this sort of fixing a motherboard in place just with wooden screws that can move around, especially if you get it out and in again, is just doesn't cut it. It has to be safely secured in place in a different way. I think one thing that is all in all really important, especially in this time of year, is that it's really moist outside. It's really wet, and moisture can get inside of the wheel. And if there's not good enough of a circulation of not steam but moisture and vapor inside of the wheel, then it can build up small droplets and fall onto the motherboard or fall onto a connector or whatever that is not well enough protected from moisture, or on the battery pack and just drip inside. So in Portland and in Poland, it was really wet outside, but in the case of Portland, the EUC was inside for quite a bit, for 3 days. So now let's move on to the second case with the Monster Pro. This EUC was from EUC sale, so Bogdan just got the EUC to check it out, and it actually was fitted with batteries that are from Begode wheels, but they weren't shipped or they weren't added on to the EUC by factory. So this is one thing to consider. But what happened is they were testing the new Monster Pro really intensely, acceleration tests and speed tests, and after that, everything was fine. They put the EUC in the car on the side, and after a while, I think like 5 or 10 minutes, I will have to look it up, Bogdan started to smell something inside the car, but he didn't know what it is, so he kept on driving, and after 10 to 15 minutes the smoke got more intense again, or the smell, and then he thought of the burning wheels. So he pulled over, and whilst pulling over there was an insane amount of smoke building up because the battery started to explode, and he pulled over on the emergency lane, and then he opened up the trunk just to see a exploding wheel inside. So he couldn't do anything about it, and when it comes to fire extinguishers, he had it laying underneath the wheel, so that's really unfortunate. Luckily, some people stopped by and took even more fire extinguishers. They had fire extinguishers, started to extinguish the wheel, but it still kept on exploding, and at some moment 2 of the guys just pulled the wheel out of the car to save the car, essentially. So yeah, Bogdan has now second-degree burns on his hand, and this is how his car looks like, and he also had a bit of trouble with his lungs for a day or 2, but now it starts to get better. Later on there was also the fire department on site and they inspected the wheel. Now the problem is that we don't have the wheel now, so maybe later on in a next video we will discuss what is like the exact case for the wheel catching on fire, but now we have just a couple of hypotheses. Luckily, in both cases, no one was really heavily injured. Of course, no one died, but nonetheless, this is really a wake-up call, sort of, for EUC companies, especially Begode in this case, because Emotion didn't have these issues over time, or at least nothing that I know of over the last period, and the same as Kingsong, also as Veteran. So, when you look at the Monster Pro, especially, it has a motherboard that is really close to the battery pack. Like, it's a lot of stuff that could possibly go wrong. Now, I also talked with Mark from Bear e-bike. Now it's called Bear e-bike, before it was Cyclone e-bike. And most probably it is an issue with moisture ingress or with the lack of isolation on the battery pack. So the wheel had around 200 or 250 kilometers on the clock, not more. So around 50 was done by EUC sale, and the other 200 or so was done on the Monster Pro here in Poland. And the fire started after like 3 days of testing. Now, they were doing drag tests and they were also doing speed tests on the wheel, and it was also cold. So the colder it gets, the more strain on the battery. Now, there's a couple things that can happen, as said. Number one, the radiator could have been really warm and start to melt. And then some vaporized water droplets could fall on the battery, creating a short circuit. It could be also just that there was vibration or a special sort of mechanical damage when putting the wheel inside of the car, because the battery is not isolated. Like, it's not that someone puts the EUC wrongly inside the car, the battery is just not properly secured. So when putting the battery inside the car, something might have gotten loose, and this created a short circuit. So this is what could possibly happen. The other thing could be just the motor wiring wires. So the cables that lead from the motor to the motherboard could be just really hot and start melting other stuff. The next thing is just water could come in and create a short circuit. There's a lot of things that potentially could happen. Or the next thing could be that the battery was not properly mounted in place, and it would start rubbing against the sharp motherboard, and then the motherboard would create a short circuit. There's a lot of things that possibly could go wrong. And the interesting part about it is that just mostly one battery pack that was the closest to the motherboard fried, and the next motherboard aside to it, just a couple of battery cells died or exploded. On the other side, it was not that bad of an issue. And the other issue could be that it's just some sort of BMS failure, but the problem is that to have some or any kind of short circuit or batteries exploding in a wheel, it needs to be some sort of physical damage. So moisture, or just the plates that connect the batteries moving, or the batteries could have also gotten too hot, or they were used too much in this cold weather. So for example, these batteries that are actually inside of the Monster Pro are decreasing their performance a lot in cold weather. That's what I was talking about in the last video. So during, for example, a hard braking or hard acceleration or continuous max discharge that is over the required discharge from the battery, could have led to a higher resistance in one battery, and for example, one cell would get a defect, and then this one cell would explode, and then all the others would explode.
In this case, the EUC should have sensors or alarms or power decreasing or just power limitation that would prevent this sort of damage to the battery pack itself, or a fuse.
So there's a lot of stuff that could have gone wrong. Now, we don't have the wheel, but probably we will leave this for our next episode to see the wheel in person and check what could have gotten wrong. If you have any suggestions, by the way, what could have gotten wrong, then just type them in the comment below. Now, for example, in comparison to the Monster Pro, if you look at other wheels, for example, the Emotion V11, the Emotion V11 has a smart BMS, and it also has a casing around the battery made out of plastic that makes this a lot more puncture proof and also eliminates possibility of these small movements where the batteries could get loose. The same thing was also in the Ninebot Z10. Also in Emotion wheels, I fried several motherboards and fuses, but the good thing is that there is a fuse, and if something goes wrong, it's not the battery pack that goes haywire, because if a motor burns, you're fine. If a motherboard burns, you're also fine. But if the battery pack burns, that's where the trouble starts. I also think that the placement of the motherboard in the Monster Pro is just too close to the battery, because all of these cables are just in one spot. They all can get hot, and you know, the isolators might melt or something else. It's just really a lot of warmth in just one spot. There's also a hole like on the EX that leads directly to the wheel well, and whilst they were not riding in rain, the surface was a little damp, so some water might have just gotten inside, and when just putting the wheel on the side, it just happened to make a short circuit. Next thing also might be that the batteries weren't balanced while putting them in, but I believe this would be a problem that would just show itself earlier, so that the packs by EUC sale were just not balanced or were from different, for example, 2 packs were used more than the others, so this also creates an imbalance, or just the connectors that they use to make the connection to the motherboard, because it's a different cable length, also wasn't proper. So there's a lot of things that might have gone wrong in this case, or it might be just also the isolation. Mostly what I believe it could be the temperature or the battery rubbing against the motherboard, creating a short circuit, or just that the batteries inside of this singular battery pack became loose and also making a short circuit. So yeah, this is pretty bad, obviously, and manufacturers obviously, especially in the case of the MSP, which wasn't like, it was just factory, need to do something to ensure that we as riders are safe. When a cutoff happens, the wheel doesn't catch on fire. The fire is the most annoying thing here in this case. A better battery cover, a better battery seal and isolation is what we need. Of course, a smart BMS is always good to have. All the connections should be properly sealed, and there should be proper gauges of the cables and proper connectors as well. And especially Begode needs to do something about their short circuit protection, because as of it is right now, it's really not working. If you wanted to, for example, short a Ninebot Z10, you can't really do it on the connectors, whilst you can do it really easily on the Begode MSP or whatever. And of course, the devices need to be really waterproof and well tested before they just get out in this world. So every floss, for example, like the hole in the EX I had, or now the Monster Pro actually also fried in New York City. Something with the board, or it was just a hole which leads to the outside of the wheel well, where just water can ingress from the side. So all of these things are really crucial for our safety. Now, I know this is a pretty new product, the EUC overall, and now EUCs get really a lot faster, but then also the electronics, the knowledge, the testing that goes into these wheels needs to be far more thoroughly done, because just a lot more is on the line. If you have 3,600 watt hours of battery packs and also just 100 volts of a voltage in a single battery pack catching fire, this is not something that you want to have. And if manufacturers give us the power of having this and this amount of available speed and acceleration, then it means that we can use it. And you know, we see it always in videos that, you know, people accelerate, people go fast, but we also need to make sure that this style of riding is also safe. So yeah, this is a pretty serious subject. I hope that mostly Begode goes really seriously, approaches this really seriously, because it's not about, you know, selling the most amount of wheels and in not that good quality, and still, you know, it's just a small percentile of wheels that burned over the last, you know, half a year or 1 year, but we need to bring this number down to 0. And if you would also ask these two riders, this was a traumatic experience. So it's really important to up our game in the EUC industry in safety. So if you're still here, leave a like on the video, subscribe to see more content like this. I'll see you in the next video.